Yes, it's about to. There we go.
That's good. So thanks everyone for joining. We probably have more people trickling in. So it's the middle of the week, but we are really excited. Today, this is the 4th or the 5th. I keep kind of lost track of the count, but
it might be 6th.
Maybe 6th. We have one more coming up next month as well with a different, with a Stern alum. But for today, we are really excited to have Chat with us. Chat is the founder and CEO of Care+Wear. He will give us a brief intro. We will have the first few minutes of this conversation where we'll ask him some questions that we have, kind of standard questions that we ask a lot of the founders. And then we'll open up the floor for any Q&A you guys have. And we will look forward to a very engaging session here. So, Chad, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe talk about your background? I know we have discussed this a couple of weeks back. It's a really interesting background. So, welcome to the Sociate Q&A.
Yeah, no, thank you all for joining me. Hopefully, where you all are is better weather than New York City is today, but. My name's Chaitenya Razdan. I'm the founder and CEO of CareWear. Started the company 7 years ago. My background before, proud UVA alum, then spent 4 years as a strategy consultant working for Kearney, where I was told that I would get to tell Fortune 500 CEOs what to do as a 22-year-old and stay at the Ritz-Carlton and travel first class. My first project was in Rockford, Illinois, where when we were lucky, we would get the quality in, but most times it was a non-branded hotel. I guess I knew I would enjoy it when I still thought it was cool that we were getting paid to stay in hotel rooms. But nonetheless, left to go to business school at the University of Chicago, Booth School of Business, swore I would never move back to New York and never do investment banking. So naturally moved back to New York and worked for Goldman Sachs doing investment banking, and then joined the startup world, I guess 1 year before starting CareWear, and then started the company 7 years ago. Do you want me to give the brief overview of the company and all that?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We should definitely start off with that because I'm not sure if everybody had a chance to check you out in advance, and if they did, they'll hear it again. But I think it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah, totally. So 7 years ago, I had loved ones diagnosed with cancer told to wear socks over what's called a PICC line. A PICC line, for those of you that might not know, is an IV tube. It goes in your arm and connects to your heart, and it's how you get nutrition or medication into your body over an elongated period of time. And so it's really commonly used for chemo infusion, and honestly saw like 3 people wearing socks on their arms over a pretty short time period and was like, wow, this stinks. There's got to be something better. Couldn't find anything better. And the one skill set I had in my former consulting and banking lives was Google. And when I couldn't find it on Google, I was like, wow, okay, there's a real need here. And started working with nurses and doctors from Hopkins and UVA to try and redesign the tube sock. And kind of while we were doing that, took a step back and realized whenever you go to the hospital, everything has always been focused on function and not on how it looks or how it makes you feel, and just felt that there was a need to build a brand in the healthcare space. Because of my background, as I mentioned, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do this alone, and so wanted to get smart people in the room with me. The approach we took to product development has now become our 3-pronged approach to design and development of each of our products. So first and foremost is always working with clinicians to make sure that our products are medically superior to everything else out there. For our PICC line covers, for example, that's how we knew to create a mesh window to allow for breathability and visibility to the site. That actually strategically has enabled us to get proprietary IP on each and every one of our products. Secondly is working with the actual end users. So I liken it back to when I was a child, I had tubes in my ears multiple times, and so would go into the hospital for surgery, and always was terrified of the fact that I was getting surgery. Was even more terrified of the fact that I wasn't the cool kid, so I wasn't getting my tonsils removed, which meant I wasn't going to be on an ice cream diet for a week. And then lastly, I also, even worse, all the doctors operating on me were friends of the family because my mom was an anesthesiologist. So her mentor was the one giving me anesthesia. One of her favorite surgeons was the one putting tubes in my ears, et cetera, and being terrified that I was exposing myself to everyone in the hospital with the open backside gowns. So making sure that we incorporate 7-year-old version of chat involved in the design and development of each of our products. And then finally is incorporating fashion and design. So working with fashion designers like Oscar de la Renta and Josie Nattori. We actually have taught a class at Parsons School of Design where we redesigned the patient gown. We also have had the opportunity to work with brands foundations like the March of Dimes, and then have the rights to people like Major League Baseball. So today we work with, we sell both online through our website. We sell directly to hospitals. We work with over 80 hospitals and governments. We sell through third parties, and just excited to be helping as many people as possible. And then yesterday, now I can share this. I couldn't share this with them last week. We were just named the 20th fastest growing company in America by Inc. 5000.
Fantastic! I saw that that you shared that on LinkedIn today.
I saw that yesterday.
That's amazing. Yeah, congratulations! Exciting news.
Kind of nuts.
Way more excitement ahead.
Cool. Yeah.
Way more excitement ahead. I mean, that was I think a fantastic overview. I'm sure we're going to dive into a few more of those topics in a little bit more detail. But if you like, maybe I think what I'll do, and if we didn't mention it up front, we did get 1 or 2 questions in advance. But usually the way we run these sessions is you guys can just drop your questions into the chat as we go, and then after I finish just with my handful of quote unquote prepared questions, we can definitely get to those. And Megan, we'll get to your question first since you submitted that in advance. But I always like to ask, especially when we do these monthly talks with entrepreneurs and people like yourself, there's always like kind of a few salient points we like to hit. So you already told us why you were passionate about the healthcare industry and kind of what brought you to this point. But people often like to hear about what were your biggest challenges when starting the company, or it can even be challenges that you've experienced as the company has grown, because I'm sure you've had your share of those along the way as well, not just when you were starting off. So feel free to kind of expand on that throughout.
Yeah, totally. It's funny because every day is a complete roller coaster ride. There's always 9 billion things that are going really well, and there's 9 billion things that are a fire drill and dealing with. In fact, the reason I was 2 minutes late, we are going to be going into another sales channel, and they frantically are needing our pictures in packaging, which we've never actually been asked for. So trying to figure out, do we have that? And if so, where is it, et cetera, which is just fun times, but kind of nuts. I think the biggest challenge is in the early days, and still I would argue, is just driving brand awareness. I'm a former finance and consulting guy. Like, I don't understand marketing. I don't know it. I have ideas most of the time. They're terrible ideas. And so finding the right people that can help you and realizing that it's going to be different people along the way. And I still remember one of my friends is Phil Krim, the founder of Casper, and I've always really looked up to him. And I remember being at an event with him and the founders of Warby and at the time Blue Apron and Plated and a bunch of companies that everyone's heard of. And I remember being like, oh my God, my life is so hard. I'm alone doing this, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, oh yeah, it gets way worse as you kind of continue to grow and build more teams. And I think it's just new problems arise that you're not expecting and you aren't aware of. And I think the best thing I learned and probably the most helpful from our, the most helpful is just like of my background is like, you just got to be used to, you got to be used to things blowing up and like take it with a grain of salt, and you try really hard, and worst case scenario, it doesn't work out, and best case scenario, it does really well. And a lot of it's out of your control. And I think that's been the most important thing. I'd say the second thing is making sure you recognize the growth, right? So like the Inc. 5000 thing is somewhat cheesy, but it's also incredible, right? Like when we think about, and I don't like to talk about growth. I don't like, for me, it's how can we build a community? How can we help more people? But it's, we grew, I think they published that we grew over 14,000% over the last 3 years. And like, those are real numbers, and we've been able to help millions of people. And I still remember when we started, and John, the answer to that is you've never made it. But we've started with helping one patient, and now last year we delivered over 15 million units. And it's being able to do that, I think, is what kind of drives you to keep doing more and wanting to do as much as possible. So I know I kind of somewhat answered it and then took it 5 other paths. So apologies.
No, that's great. And since we're getting so many questions in the chat, I'm going to keep my questions short for now. I'm going to ask a couple others, and then we'll scroll back through the rest. So thank you guys so much. Please keep them coming. We will absolutely get to them since we're a fairly intimate group today. But one thing that we have to ask about, although I know the answer because we did talk about this previously, but your answer to this question is a bit different than some of our other founders' answers to this question. And that is, how has the pandemic impacted your business?
Yeah, we're a healthcare company. Because of the relationships we have built with hospitals, we had the opportunity to help even more people. We ended up in the last year adding 50 new hospital systems and governments as clients. Standard year, you're celebrating adding 1 or 2, so 50 is pretty insane. We grew over 100 times. We have had an amazing year, and I think it's the best feedback I got was from one of the hospital systems that was like, look, we've been getting your cold emails and phone calls for the last 6 years, and apologies for never replying. But now we knew that when we were in need of help, we knew you'd been around, you had been contacting us, you had come to us from people we knew, you were trusted, and we were excited to work with you. And I think that has been, I guess the benefit of being the one cold calling everyone for 6 years was they were all used to my name. But no, we've had the opportunity to help millions of people, which has been awesome.
Excellent. So I'm only going to ask just one more question, and then we'll start going into the group's questions, and we'll circle back around if we have more time. Are you hiring right now for any MBA appropriate roles, and or if not, what does your trajectory for hiring look like? I think you're probably expected to grow quite a bit from what we spoke about last time, so I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, totally. Lesson I've learned is you're always hiring when you're running a startup. You always want to find great people that can join and that really embody the mission and grow. We've actually, in the last year, hired 2. We have 16 on our team right now. We're hiring 2 more we both, we had two people that we created positions for because we liked them so much, positions that we didn't think we needed or existed. So always looking. Currently for an MBA, the one position we need help with is growth marketing. So we're looking for a growth marketing manager. Apparently, so is the rest of the world. So if you're a growth marketer, it's a great time to be looking. But finding someone to help us with that, I think would be really, really important and really helpful. Over the next year, we will likely double, if not triple the team size. So while that might not be the right role for you, we'll likely be hiring sooner rather than later.
Excellent. So now for the growth marketing manager position, if that rec is still open,
Mm-hmm.
or something you want to share with me, I'd like to circulate a couple materials after we end up talking in the
Yeah.
show, just so that people who joined have access to it. And then, of course, with your permission, just sharing your contact information. And if you aren't, you probably will be on Sociate shortly. So people can also contact you there. But yeah, I'd love to have your information out there, because I had mistakenly said to somebody else before that I think you thought you were doubling next year, but that's right. You did tell me you're thinking that it may be more like triple. So there's huge things in store for you guys.
Yeah.
So that's great. Thank you so much. Before we go into the chat messages in here, I'm just gonna bring up a question from Megan that she had submitted in advance. So I just want to make sure I get her question out there first, and then Megan, feel free to go off mute and clarify the question or enhance it. But she had asked if you can share a little bit about your process of user testing of the garments, and how did that then help you refine the product? Like, I know you said you had worked with clinicians earlier on, but what did some of your user testing more specifically look like? And Megan, feel free to chime in and clarify the question.
Yeah, totally. So it's definitely evolved over time. When it started, it was talking to actual patients at Johns Hopkins and UVA and running kind of the idea by them, then showing them the prototype, visiting with them, having them test out the prototype. The first year, it took me a year to build the PICC line cover because I didn't know what I was doing. Now, I think the quickest product we brought out to market is probably 3 months, which is basically just one manufacturing run and getting it delivered. We normally like to tell partners we expect to take 6 to 9 months to design and develop a product. But having user input and feedback is so important. When we taught our Parsons class, we had 10 amazing students as part of the class that were designing and developing patient gowns. We had 2 fashion designers teaching the class. We had a lot of patients come into the class and test out various iterations of the garments, had them do a variety of different things. So had them lie down in the garment, had them sit, had them walk, trying to think about what are the use cases for that garment. And then we ended up having 9 hospital systems involved, as well as the full life cycle. So including laundry and linen, because for a patient gown, commercial laundry and linen is one of the most important elements. So really just trying to think about who's touching this type of a garment and making sure that they're involved in the design and development. For our scrubs that we just launched, we had nearly 100 different clinicians involved, and the idea was to get a broad variety, because when we're trying to create a product, we're always trying to make sure that every use case is thought of. And sometimes we are really fortunate to get new use cases that we haven't thought about. Sometimes, but our goal is never to overthink a use case, but rather really make sure that we've tested it out and ensure that the use cases that we're talking about actually are use cases, and that we have patients or clinicians that have that need already having tested it out.
That's great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, of course.
And Megan, we'll get to your other question in a little bit too. So for now, I think we'll start at the top of the chat again. And Dan, you were kind of the first one to put it out there in the chat. So I know you had a few questions, so I'll let you kind of ask them, and instead of me having to read it off for you.
Sure, thank you. Hi, Chad. Nice to meet you, and thank you for speaking tonight. My first question is, how did you go from 0 to 1, meaning, you had this idea, it sounds like you had, X amount of skills, but you weren't a designer, you weren't a web developer. Like, how do you go from having your idea to making the first product to getting it, uploaded somewhere and sold? Like, if you can just speak to that, because I find the most intimidating part about entrepreneurship is literally going from 0 to 1. It sounds like once you get momentum, things start happening. But if you can just speak to that first step, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the real truth is I'm still making it up 7 years in. So I don't know that I have a tried and tested method. I don't know it's the right method. But I think it's just doing stuff, right? Like I think for CareWear, I came up with the concept in February of 2014 and ended up going full time with it in May, and then didn't actually fundraise until the following January. So spent a lot of time without money, for better or worse. And then when we raised money, it was very little amount of money. I mean, there's the obvious things like legal incorporation and like talking to people. I think the biggest thing I would say is don't be afraid to ask for help and go to people that know what they're doing. So for me, because I didn't come from healthcare or design and development, was making sure that I got people from both backgrounds around me. I ended up creating an advisory board at the time of 13 people, which is very high. And I would send them weekly updates. And that kind of held myself accountable to get something done. Because if it was Wednesday, like it is today, and I hadn't accomplished enough for that email, I was like, oh crap, I only have 2 more days until I need to send this email to these 13 people. And I knew many of the 13 people. And so it was people that I really didn't want to let down. And so that really helped with the momentum. I think it was one of the first idea. It's actually the first idea and only idea. Normally I'll come up with an idea and I'll spend a ton of time researching and basically convincing myself that it doesn't make sense to do. For CareWear was the complete opposite, where I was talking to nurses and doctors. Everyone was talking about how this is a need. Everyone was taking my phone call. Everyone was calling me back when I was leaving a voicemail. And I had been at a startup in between Goldman and CareWear that wasn't the case, and people I knew really well weren't returning my calls because I was selling them. And so I was like, wow, there's something here. Like, people normally don't return calls this quickly. This is pretty incredible. I think the other thing is just going out and executing, right? Like I would just say, hey, I'm going to do this, and then I would do it. And like, our first prototype sucked. It was from a company manufacturing in Minneapolis. They charged us, I think, $1,000 to make it. I've since learned that you can normally get factories to make a prototype for pretty cheap and not $1,000, but I think I just didn't know. And so I went to them, and over time I got connected with various factories. I leveraged my network. Like, all of you probably have incredible networks, and being able to go to people, like for us, went to people that knew manufacturers, that knew, our first factory was like a friend's dad was on the board of. One of the factories we still use today, actually, I was an RA in college, and one of my residents runs a really big men's outdoor brand now that he built from scratch. And so I used his factory to do that. And so it's just going to people that you know that have been working in similar space and asking them for help. And then it's really being willing to evolve over time. And as we've grown, we've been able to hire more and more people. And so then I can really bring on experts that are really good at things that I'm not good at. And I think that's been really, really important. I always like to joke with everyone that I add no value. And so finding people that are going to add value to the business.
Awesome. And I guess that's a segue to my second question. Oh, should I continue or no? Is that
I would say yes, since it's a good segue, and then after that, if you don't mind, I'm going to hop to a couple of other people, but definitely because I feel like that's a natural part to your first question.
yeah? So my second question was, how do you bring on people without losing control of your company? So you're talking about all these experts. Obviously, you have this idea, but you had I'm not going to say a limited skill set, but the limited ability to execute on your vision. So how do you bring on all these people without losing, I guess, control, both from like an equity perspective and also just general control?
Yeah, I think that's a very personal decision for sure. If you Google, like, most advisors are giving somewhere up to like 1 to 3% of the company to an advisory board. So in the grand scheme of things, that's really not that big of a percentage. One of the biggest lessons I learned in business school, I did Booth has what they call the New Venture Challenge, where it's like a business plan competition, et cetera. And I had done that with 3 other guys, and we all owned an equal stake in the company. We all had it immediately, et cetera. And I learned, like, hey, this doesn't make sense. If someone's not pulling their weight, they shouldn't still own a quarter of the company. And so doing 4-year vesting for even the founders was super important. My equity is common, so I have the same shares that all of my employees have now. In terms of losing control, I would look at it as a different way. I would look at it as, who's going to help you solve that infamous formula of 1 + 1 = 3, of who's going to really add value. And so for me, it's always been about, who do I want to aggressively bring on and give them a portion of the company. And I think my dad worked for the same company for 40 years, which I know is like unheard of these days. We, from the get-go, have said every employee that comes to CareWear will get equity, even once we are able to afford hiring our own janitors, et cetera. I would want them to have a piece of the pie, because for me, we're building a community, we're building a family. And for me, it's really hard to say, hey, you're an owner, and I want you to act like an owner if you don't have an ownership stake. So I probably look at it a little differently, in that, who's going to help us grow the most and who's going to add value. For us, from an investor standpoint, I've always gone for people that can add value, less inclined to worry about what brand name are they, et cetera. And I think that that's something that is really, really important to find, if you're lucky enough to find, is who's gonna be able to really help you drive the business forward.
Great. Thank you for your insights.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thanks so much. And I think next, Megan, we'll get to your second question a little bit later. But Zach, why don't you go? You're up now, and I'll have you kind of ask your question in your own words again.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, chat.
Hey.
I was just curious. I heard your 3-pronged approach before, just kind of for moving forward. I'm in a healthcare compliance company right now, and I've heard some rumblings. I've only been there for a little bit, but that kind of things were stagnant for a little bit. So I'm just trying to think ahead and figure out a way to help them kind of plan for the future. And I was just wondering if you had any strategies or any ideas, kind of just, or how you go about the process. Obviously, it's been working for you.
Yeah, I think it's just having a really strong sense of urgency, and realizing that if there's a lot of downtime, use it as an opportunity to really look at what you're doing, and is there something that you can help your customers with that might not be core to your business right now. And so a perfect example for us was PPE. So when March hit last year, and the whole first New York shut down, then pretty much the entire country shut down. And obviously no one was looking to buy a new patient gown or a new PICC line cover or whatever. Well, shockingly they were, which was very surprising. But the hypothesis was that they were not. And that when you were talking to people, they didn't have time to worry about something like that. They had to worry about protecting the front lines. I heard horror stories. One hospital told us how they bought 10 million rubber bands thinking that they were buying N95 masks. Another hospital bought 1 million pieces of tissue paper, thinking that they were buying disposable masks. We still joke to this day with them that if only it had been toilet paper, they would have made a profit. But nonetheless, just like hearing these stories and saying, hey, our factories are making this, our factories are FDA approved. We already, we've been working with them for 6 years, so we know that their products exist. How can we help you? And I was very open with people. I was like, look, we're not really profiting from this. I don't know. This is not our traditional margin. I don't know the pricing of these products. This is not our core competency. So I can give you a price. You tell me if that works or it doesn't work. No hard feelings. I just want to help you. And what I told them is, I'm willing to do this, but I want a seat at the table once the world is back to normal. And I want you to at least consider buying our products. And no, you're not making any promises to me, but I want to have that opportunity to work with you. And we ended up apparently being the only vendor to deliver in the timings that we said, got amazing feedback. And now because of that, it's really opened the floodgates for our quote unquote core products, et cetera, and really allowed us to grow like bananas with everything else. And so I guess to go back to your question, I would say, hey, if our normal course of business is slow right now, what else can we be doing that aligns with us as a brand and us for our customers, and talk to them and listen to them and see what they need help with, and then see what you know how to do and kind of bring those two together.
Awesome. No, thank you. And glad that you guys pulled that off. I know it's been a crazy couple of years. Anything you can do to help the cause is huge.
Yeah, there's unfortunately a lot of scammers and a lot of people that were stealing money left and right, but we were really fortunate for the most part to work with people that we knew and trusted and were able to deliver.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. And so I think we answered John's kind of first question, which is about how you knew you made it. So we'll cover John's other question in a little bit. But Bethany, you had a very interesting question as well, so I'd love for you to ask it now.
Yeah, so thank you so much for talking to us today. And you addressed this a bit when you were talking about use cases, but I think that in entrepreneurship and in healthcare in particular, one of the challenges is identifying the real problem that needs to be solved and the real solution that people are looking for, in contrast to what you're perceiving or what you're seeing. So I would be really interested to hear what that process looked like for you, what research you did, and how you finally identified the core problem and matched that to the products that you're putting out today.
Yeah, totally. For the PICC line covers, quite frankly, I didn't do a good job of research. I mean, I talked to over 1,000 clinicians about it, et cetera, and that's what made me realize this is a real problem. Today we have a much more tried and tested kind of approach where we are bringing those people in the room, as I mentioned, the 3 prongs of the end users, the clinicians, and the designers together. And then what we generally do is we will have a buyer before we create a product. So everything that CareWear is making, we've already identified a buyer for the first product. And that's super important because it tells me hey, this is so needed that someone's willing to fork over $250,000 to $500,000 immediately to pay for it before it's even out on the market. And I think that has been an awesome way for us to really de-risk the situation for ourselves. I know when I came out with the PICC line covers, everyone was saying yes, and then I launched it, and it took me about a year to get my first sale on an enterprise side, and I was like, wow, this sucks. And so trying to solve for that has been super important for us. I think the second thing is over time we've evolved from launching one product at a time to really thinking about it holistically of how does it align with our brand, how does it align with what we're doing, and how do we do something that really can make a difference. And so your traditional market research, we've gotten a lot better about looking at market sizing, looking at initial markets first, where that market will be in 5 years, like when I looked at the PICC line covers, for example, I knew that worldwide it was 6 million people were getting PICC lines placed, growing at greater than 5%. And so to me, that was like, okay, that's around $1 billion market. So that sounds great. Today, if I were re-looking at that, I would have probably delved deeper into that 6 million and been like, okay, 3 million of that are in the US, 2.5 million of that are people with disposable income, blah, 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 right? And so really diving pretty deep into who the person is. I think the other thing is how does it align with our goal of helping each and every person? And I think that's where we probably differ than most companies, in that we have a broader mission and a broader vision of trying to reimagine healthcare as a whole and trying to bridge function and fashion together. And I think that for us, we are likely willing to take a chance on a product that others might not be, because it's something that aligns really well with everything else that we're building and doing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that notion of sort of creating personas. I've thought about this a lot, thinking about things like ostomy bags or ways that you can really make practical items part of fashion. So that was very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah,
no, and ostomy bags, quite transparently, is one of those things that we think about all the time and is definitely on our list. It's what's it called? It's definitely it's such a need, and hopefully we can do something about it sometime in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to give John a chance to ask a question. You have a couple in there, John. I don't know. I'm also very intrigued by your more recent one, but I'll let you choose which one you kind of throw out there next for chat.
So thanks for joining us. Yeah, so I have about 15, 20 years of marketing experience, so it's kind of cool to hear your point of view about that, because I look at you as an expert already. How do you go about joining an advisory board? So you mentioned you got people, but what if you're on the other end and it'd be kind of cool to join one at some point?
Yeah, so and I guess so I can kind of answer it on both ends, both in terms of forming an advisory board, and then now I'm on the other end of the world also, where I'm an advisor for several startups. For forming an advisory board, that was kind of what skills do I know I don't have that I want to get smart people around me to do? And I think lesson learned that you should probably test people out as an advisor before you make them an advisor. At the early days, I used to just make everyone an advisor, which might not be the best idea or strategy long term. But seeing who you know, how they can help, putting them to work, giving them a little equity, et cetera, and it can really be monumental. I mean, we have some advisors still today that are super involved and incredibly helpful. There's others that haven't been as helpful, to be quite candid, and we've both agreed to kind of part ways over time, and I think that's okay, right? Like, that's why you have vesting, et cetera. On the becoming an advisor for companies, it's a lot about networking and like talking to people. I had people reach out being like, hey, I'd love to be an advisor to you. And honestly, at least for me as a founder, that's normally a turnoff. Like, that's great that you want to be an advisor. Like, I'm not hiring. Like, I want advisors that they want to be there, but I want them to be aspirational, right? Like, you want someone that you think is really going to add value. In the earliest days, you want people that are going to really help your brand and your investor deck when you're going to people and you have one employee, yourself, and one sale, et cetera. You want to be able to say, well, look at all these amazing 10 people that I have around me. So for me, I have a rule where I will only join an advisory board if I think I can add value. And I think a great example for that is the mental health space. And I had this really fast-growing New York City-based company ask me for help. And I was like, look, I don't go, and I am not a patient for that, for better or worse. And so I'm not going to know what you're trying to solve for. And I'm going to be a really shitty advisor. And I think you're much better off going out and getting a doctor that does this, or someone that's been a patient and understands how terrible of a system and life cycle it is, et cetera. And so I turned her down, which financially was probably the wrong move because her startup's done very well and I would have made a lot of money. But I have limited time, and I want to make sure that with that limited time that I'm making the most of it and helping as many people as I can. And that's where you can also, I do the same thing now in investing in startups. Any startup that I invest, and by the way, my investments are tiny, but anytime I'm making an investment, I'm making sure that it's something that I can add a lot of value in.
That's cool. Thank you for your response.
Yep.
And so I think we'll get to your other question too, John, but I just wanted to make sure we hit another couple of questions that were a little bit earlier in the chat too. So Megan, you had asked another question, and you know, Chad had answered kind of the first part of it about how many people are on his team right now. About, I think you said 16 or 17. But I think your second part of your question, we didn't quite fully answer. So you had asked, do you still see any gaps in the knowledge and skills you need to be successful? So I don't know if, Megan, you were trying to phrase that as, you know, where are you looking to add to your team in order to strengthen your position, or feel free. I don't need to paraphrase it. You can go for it and ask it in your own words.
Yeah. So you did, you know, mention through the conversation that you're hiring for a growth marketing manager, but I'm wondering if there are any other kind of gaps that you've been able to identify where you're like, this is somebody we need to help us. And it could be employees, it could be users, you know, it could be advisors. I'm just curious if you've had that.
Yeah, totally. I'd say you always have gaps, right? That's the beauty of being at a startup, that there's always more help that you need. Everyone's always underwater. I would say how I think about it is, how do you want to prioritize, and what roles and needs do you have that you're prioritizing? We don't do a great job of leveraging advisors, to be honest. I think it's the transition, quite frankly, from going from me needing people telling me how to do things to now finding those people as full-time employees and building out my own executive team. They have their own mentors and people that they go to for advice. And so we now have a clinical advisory board, and we go to them for a lot, especially on the product and marketing side. And then kind of everyone kind of finds their own mentors and goes to them. From a hiring perspective, right now, the two areas we're looking for are that marketing role I mentioned, and then a entry-level product role to kind of help with day in, day out product level, like dealing with factory shipping samples, things like that. As I think about where our future priorities will be, likely in the near term, we'll start looking for more help on the sales side. Sales and marketing are kind of always hiring, I guess, and kind of take it from there. I think the only other thing is like ambassadors, back to my point of not enough people knowing about our brand and not enough people knowing about our company, is the biggest piece of feedback we always get from our community is, I wish I knew about you earlier. And that's generally been the consensus I've heard each and every time. And so helping spread the word anytime you hear of someone needing our help, to helping them know about us. And I actually always wear our product and things. So I'm wearing one of our polo shirts because you always got to be selling, I guess. But no, I think all bad jokes aside, it is really just driving awareness that we exist and that we want to help.
Great.
And if you know any hospitals, to connect us with them.
I do. So I'd love to connect with you actually offline.
Awesome.
Perfect. Okay, great. I think we have time to answer a couple more questions. So I'm kind of jumping back around up here. So Dan, you had a question about kind of how Chad had designed his career, you know, going from Goldman to another startup before starting his own business. So I don't know if you want to elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I guess, obviously you've landed on an idea and you started a company, but was it by design? Was it intentional? You mentioned you went to a startup. before you started your own company. So I was wondering, were you getting the itch and then you said, I want to get this exposure or something? Like, just curious how it happened, or it was just organic and you felt the urge.
Yeah, it's funny. While at Booth, I did a startup. It was a mobile app that allowed you to open and close your bar and restaurant tab from your phone. Genius idea. We, four guys, none of whom knew how to code, realized that if I was going to build a tech company, I really knew how to code. Needed someone that knew how to code. A lot of other issues. POS systems aren't backwards compatible. Bars and restaurants don't want to spend on a POS after they've just spent 50 grand on one, et cetera, et cetera. And so realized that wasn't the right idea, even though we had funding opportunities for that. And while at Goldman, because of my time at Booth, I definitely had that startup itch. And I realized 2 years into Goldman that if I didn't leave immediately, I was going to kind of get locked in. And it's an amazing place. I'm so thankful and grateful that I had the opportunity to work there. But I knew I'd gone there because I was like, you know what? I want to improve my finance skills. And what better place to learn finance than there? And so left and joined this other startup. And I think part of the issue was it's selling parking. And I live in New York City where I don't own a car. And I obviously am not a core user of that service. And so for me, it was a nice to have, not a need to have. I didn't necessarily think the team was the right team to be betting myself on. And I just was more excited about the CareWear idea. And so while I was at Parking Panda with a few other guys, we come up with an idea of like a ways for lines for like restaurants and stuff, like fast food and stuff, especially in New York, but realize that that's probably not as big of a problem as we think it is. And none of us knew how to code, and it was that same issue. And then with CareWear, it was like everyone was saying yes, everyone was answering the phone, returning calls. Katie Couric put us on her TV show in April, and that was kind of like, wow, okay, either I need to quit my job and do this or find someone to do this.
Well, Chat, you mentioned that to us, and you said you were on it, but not exactly, right?
Yeah, sorry. She listed us as one of her 5 favorite items and talked about us, but she couldn't show us on television because at the time I still had another job and none of them knew that I was working on that.
Oh, wow.
I know. I needed. I'm sorry to interject. I
Yeah,
just needed
no
you
problem.
to mention that because that's like a gut wrenching one, you know. That
yeah, and we've been really lucky. Katie's been an amazing, amazing fan for us. Because of her, we partner with Stand Up to Cancer. She features us often. We actually did a cool I don't know what to call it, but we made Katie Couric masks that she was providing to her readers. She's been an incredible ambassador for the brand. And it's cool because you have people like her that you look up to. I went to UVA and she's a goddess for UVA, but she's also a goddess for everyone. And when you think about aligning the right people with your brand, when you think about who is a good celebrity to align with us, she's an amazing celebrity and she really cares. She lost her sister and her first husband to cancer. Her second husband is a Booth alum. So he always jokes, he's like, yeah, you really got us locked in between both of us. But it's people like that that just want to help you and want to help make your company better. And I think that I've been really fortunate to do that. And I would say my biggest piece of advice is don't be afraid to ask people for help. I mean, one of my first advisors and someone I still stay in touch with a lot is Nancy Green. She was the former CEO of Athleta. She's the president of Old Navy now. And that started on my cold emailing her on a Friday night and be like, hi, this is my company, blah, blah, blah. And she wrote back and like, you would never know this. But your dumb luck, like I have a personal reason for knowing what a PICC line is and knowing how terrible it is. And I want to help. Let's do a call. And she's become a really great advisor. Someone I still go to all the time and stay in touch with. And during the pandemic, we were working with her and Gap to figure out how, even if we weren't partnered together as companies, what we could do to help people on the front lines and how we could help each other out. And I think that that again only came because I cold emailed her on a Friday night at like 10 p.m. And so it's when you find that thing that makes you want to work on it at 10 p.m. on a Friday night, that's when you know, like, hey, there's something here and you've got to try it. And it's, for me, the best piece of feedback I've gotten from our investors now is like, you never want to give up, and you want to keep going after it. And you got to be like your community, right? Like, our patients are never giving up. They are doing whatever they can. They're living their lives, and we need to do the same thing. And long way to go, but it's been really fun.
Awesome. Thank you for your
Great.
time.
And so John's last question in the chat is also one of my questions that I wanted to ask, kind of a general, with, you know, understanding that there's only so much that you can share, but what is next? What's next in terms of, you know, like John's question asked, like, do you have a specific category that you're looking to target next? I mean, in terms of athletics, you said that the polo was yours, which I did not know.
Yeah.
But, and also just, yeah, what's next that you can share with us? What exciting things are on the horizon that you are able to share?
Yeah, we are being very high level here, I guess, because I'll get in trouble with our PR agency if I say anything specific. We're definitely looking at expanding current product offerings, kind of doing things that are similar customers. We'll be launching a few more things in the fall for that. We're working on a collaboration with a really big hospital system in the Northeast, one of the top brands, which will be super exciting. We're kind of going more mainstream, I guess, if you will, and we'll be adding a couple more sales channels, which is really exciting. And I know I'm being super vague, sorry.
No, this is perfect.
We're always in talks with other brands to potentially do collaborations with them. We obviously have some amazing brand partners already that we will likely do more with. And yeah, I guess the world is our oyster. There's a lot of opportunities. I think it's fun because now I get to do a lot more of those discussions, and I do less of the cold calling everyone, although I'm still cold calling quite a bit. But yeah, no, I think really just honored to get the chance to try and change lives. And I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, and then I saw a colonoscopy, and when all the nurses were around me rather than the patient, I realized I wasn't probably meant to be a doctor. But this is one of the next best things that we could do, and I get to live my dream out each and every day, and hopefully we grow much bigger and all that. But it's the ride of a lifetime, and it's so fun.
So Chad, I'm so glad we got to speak to you now, because I feel like if we had tried to get on your calendar in a year or two from now, it might be pretty impossible. So Randeep, great job for connecting with him when you did. I'm just kidding. You're obviously the kind of person that will make
for better or worse, the Goldman in me is still there. I reply to everything and all that stuff.
Super exciting. So I know we're pretty much almost out of time. So Randeep, if you wanted to just close out, and I'll just mention a couple things.
I was going to say thanks, Chad, for joining us. I mean, you pretty much agreed. I have to say, in full disclosure, probably in the very first couple of messaging. That's not often the case with many founders, so really appreciate that. And you know, it's great to have people from different alums. Like I know you went to Booth, and all this kind of cross community of schools and alums coming and asking you questions. So hopefully this was as useful and kind of conversation for you as it was, I'm sure, for all of us here. So and look forward to having you on Sociate, as well as being I guess a big fan of Sociate also, as well as the community. And I think Marcy will send out the link to the recording if someone missed. And we have just for programming purpose, we have another session coming up in a few weeks from now, which should be really exciting.
Yeah, a little over a month from now, it'll be another. We don't always necessarily feature founders and CEOs, but it is one of our favorite things to do when we can. So it'll be a different founder and CEO from Stern in the fintech space. So, anybody on this call, even if that's not your bag, because healthcare is, please tell your friends. But again, thanks so much, chat. This was awesome. I knew it would be a great talk from the first 5 minutes that we chatted a few weeks ago. And thanks to everybody for asking. You know, I love, this always seems to happen in our, two things I notice in all of our monthly Q&As that we have. One, the speakers are always just super candid and honest and upfront, which makes for such an enjoyable, productive conversation. And we always get such a nice mix of questions from the group. There's never silence in the chat, even if we don't have 50 or 100 people on, which we don't. I actually don't know how we would have ever answered everybody's questions then. So this was kind of perfect. And I know that there's a lot of people interested in watching the recording. And so when we do share your information out and the job out, I suspect you may get a few pings, chat, but you did say that was okay. So just making sure that
if I can ever be helpful, thank you all for taking the time. And I'm very active on LinkedIn and social. My Twitter's terrible, so you probably don't want to follow me there, but everything else, happy to help however I can. And thank you all for tuning in today.